My name is Pip Brennan, and 10 years ago I underwent an experience that led me into a whole new area of learning. I was the victim of a home invasion and a sexual assault as a 36-year-old mother of a very young child, and there was a lot of things I didn't know about a lot of things. So I went through the whole process as a victim, and I have become extremely interested in a lot of the issues that especially I met a lot of wonderful people on the way, people that I shared my healing journey with, and I heard a lot of stories from them and stories as a professional, and all of these things have combined to make me feel that there's a lot of great things about services, but they can always, I think, they can always be improved. For me, it was completely unknown. The whole area of sexual assault, sexual abuse, domestic violence, the sorts of things that a lot of women have survived, was completely alien to my experience. So I learned an awful lot because I had become a victim of sexual assault at, what seemed like a relatively advanced age. My very first experience was with the police. And at that stage there wasn't a specialist sexual assault squad, so I had both the local police attend and also I think they were called the serious crime squad. So I just remember that it was the whole thing from the moment you make the phone call, the whole process began, and you really didn't really understand a lot. For myself, because I was living alone, I contacted my neighbour who came over to see me and make sure that I was all right, and he was the first person I told, and I didn't understand, but he needed to be taken away and questioned. And when the police came and questioned me, I kept wondering where they'd taken him, and I kept wanting him to come back. I just wanted to have a friendly face while I was starting the process of answering questions. And I had to ask them, why, where has he gone? Is there something wrong? And, it just started that whole process of really just, I guess you are a victim of a crime, but you're also the only witness, and you're also, the police have got a need to collect evidence, and that need to collect evidence has to take precedence over, your social and emotional needs. Although I would like to stress that the police were really very kind, and they were very considerate, and they looked after me extremely well. Basically, what then happened was I had to go and do a statement, and I didn't have any concept of how long that would take. I had a very young child, and I'd never really left her much, and that was probably the longest I'd ever left her. It was like pretty much a full working day. So up to the police station and getting the whole thing written down took such a long time, and I would have really liked to have done the forensic first and had a shower and then done the statement, but that wasn't the way around that it went. And it was quite a process, but I guess it never occurred to me that I wouldn't make a statement, that I wouldn't press charges, because as soon as it had happened to me, I just really wanted to try and make the community safer, and I just really wanted to get the person off the streets and make sure that it was safer for the community. So while I was in the police station making the statement, I got a couple of phone calls from the Sexual Assault Resource Centre. I'd never heard of the Sexual Assault Resource Centre prior to being a victim, and they rang me a couple of times just to say, you don't need to make a statement, you don't need to make a statement. And I was quite surprised. I didn't really understand what that was all about. But, the police kind of intimated that perhaps that was why they were doing it, statement first and then forensic, because they were perhaps concerned that the evidence wouldn't, that they wouldn't be able to take the statement without doing it in that order. I was then taken to the Sexual Assault Resource Centre, and I was greeted by a counsellor, and I also met the doctor, because it was Perth based, so it was a doctor doing the forensic, and they both could not have been nicer. They were just lovely. They really spent a lot of time talking through the process of having a forensic and what it would entail, and they sought consent all the way through. The counsellor basically just sat and talked to me, so she sat in my head and she spoke to me while the whole process was going on, and every single new thing that the doctor did, she just explained what she was doing, checked that that was okay. Even though I signed a consent form, it was still an ongoing process of informing and gaining my consent, so that I always felt like I was at choice. I always felt that I was respected and that we were all hoping to get the evidence that we need. I really wanted to get the evidence, and they really wanted to help me to obtain that evidence, but also be looked after as a woman. So they really were fantastic. So that part of the process I thought was really great, and I really do feel that in West Australia, because you can actually go ahead and you can go ahead, attend the Sexual Assault Resource Centre, and you can go through the whole forensic process without actually reporting to the police. You don't have to make the decision there and then, but it does mean that you've got that option should you change your mind over time. You've actually already got that forensic evidence collected, and you do have that choice. And if you do want to proceed with a police investigation, it's obviously a lot easier. So I think that disconnect between the police and the forensic process is really good in WA. I think we're very lucky. I think that part of it was really good. What was not so good for me was being offered a choice of either individual counselling or group therapy, as a kind of an either-or proposition. Either you can have individual counselling or you can have group counselling. And I think in some ways it's very much about, I really felt that I was respected, and that they wanted to help me they wanted me to make all the decisions and have full agency in the decisions, but I actually didn't always understand what the options were, so it was a bit difficult to make a good decision. At that time I said I would prefer to do group work, but what I didn't understand is there wouldn't be a group for nearly 9 months, and I actually fell through the system. I didn't get any counselling at all for more than 2 weeks, so that was really difficult. I was very lucky in that I went to my GP in that intervening time for the more acute post-traumatic stress, and she was completely able to name. She said, that's post-traumatic stress. It gave me something to go and Google and something to try and find out a little bit more about while I was waiting to get the counselling sorted. So I mean, I really appreciated the fact that I was given the agency to make decisions, but I think it's really important to help people make the right decisions, and sometimes you do need to guide a little bit, and you need to understand what you need to make sure people understand what the choices actually are. It was about 9 months before I did group work, and I really, really found it to be incredibly helpful. I found the process of peer support was something that individual counselling can't really touch. I think individual counselling is important, but for me personally, the great healing work that happened in the group process was much more therapeutically effective than one-on-one counselling. So at the time I was concerned that I had to wait so long to get into a group. I don't really understand. I'm sure there's got to be more women that need the groups. I don't really understand why there was such a long wait between groups and such a small uptake of groups. I do think that women in the community are not aware that this service is available, and that it really is a fantastic way, no matter how long it's been since the assault. It is a bit like a cancer. It doesn't necessarily go away, and having the opportunity to do this kind of work in group with skilled therapeutic facilitation is really, really beneficial, and it would be great, I think, if more women knew that this was available and that they took it up, because you really can, it doesn't have to define you. You really can be whole. Human beings are incredibly resilient, and we can heal and we can move on. After the assault, there were quite a lot of practical issues that, I had to deal with. The first, of course, is like I had flashbacks and nightmares, and I couldn't stay in the house where it had happened, which of course was my home. And I was hoping that that would pass over time, and for a while there, friends and family were coming to stay with me overnight so that I could, I guess in a way, babysitting me so that I could sleep in the house. But after a while, it just wasn't going to work, and so then what I needed to move. And it was a very difficult decision because I'd only bought the house 6 months before, and I was hoping to settle down with my young daughter and get her enrolled into school. She was at that age where she was, needing to be enrolled in school and all that. So in the end, I decided to just rent out the house and not sell it and not make any drastic decisions, but actually to try and take some action to help with the flashbacks. And I moved into a secure apartment with the help of the real estate agent who'd sold me the house. She was incredibly supportive, helped me find somewhere, and of course my family were amazing, and they helped me get moved and organised. And once I was in the secure apartment, it took maybe 12 weeks and those symptoms just completely disappeared. It was really, really helpful to actually get away from the scene of the crime, as it were. It really was good. I really was lucky that I have such a good supportive family, because the services that the services through the Sexual Assault Resource Centre and even Victim Support Services aren't really geared towards that kind of practical accommodation support. You do need to have some resources of your own, I think, and that can be really difficult. I mean, I was always aware during my recovery how incredible my family were in the support that they offered me. My parents have a spare room that I could just go and stay in any time that I felt that I wasn't coping. And I don't think everyone's got that sort of support, so I could go there, they would help with parenting, they would provide meals, and I could just relax until I knew I was okay. There was quite a long period of time where I would just feel I was quite angry. I was very, very angry, and it wasn't really good for me to be left in the house with a 3.5-year-old, because there was always that danger that I could become unreasonably angry and she would be the only person there, and it wasn't nice. So that's when I could just go sit with my family, and literally it was like a feeling in my head, and then the feeling would pass and I would be fine again. So the supportive family was absolutely vital, and for people without that support, I did have a lot of times where I felt, very blessed with the support I had, and concerned for people that didn't have that support. I did sometimes find that services were good with what they did. Like, for example, the forensic service at SARC was fantastic. The group therapy service at SARC was fantastic, but there were other things I needed, as well as accommodation needs. I needed my daughter to be assessed by a child psych, because although she was only 3.5, she was a witness to the assault. And after I'd spent quite a few months pretending that it hadn't impacted on her, I knew I needed to do something to reassure myself by getting her reviewed. So I went to SARC to try and get a referral for somebody who could help me, and I kind of got that, well, we can't give recommendations, and we can't do this and we can't do that, and I just thought, I just need a signpost, and in the end they said, we can just give you these numbers. So I made the 4 or 5 phone calls that I needed with the numbers, and I found someone who was really fantastic. She was such a wonderful person. But what I would have liked was, I would have liked a little bit of help. I would have liked, instead of getting that barrier of, no, we can't do this and we can't do that, as, yes, I can see that you'd need that, how can I help you? That was really the message that I needed, because it was actually really difficult seeking that help, because I was really in denial about the impact on my child. Although I must say, I have been very lucky. She was just a little bit too young for it to have a lasting impact, and I think that's always the biggest difficulty for a parent, and I think to know that she was okay was really important. For me, the police, as mentioned, they were fantastic on the day, but it was a very long time between when the offence occurred. So it was a break-in. It was somebody I didn't know, and I wasn't able to see his face, so I couldn't do any visual identification. It was more than 14 months before he was actually apprehended on another completely unrelated case, and he was matched through the DNA that I had provided in the forensic. Now, in that time, I had had a lot of contact with the police. They had been quite proactive. They'd kept me in touch with the case. They'd been really good. But the reality is with the police is that they are constantly changing jobs, and so there isn't that continuity. So by the time he was actually caught, it was somebody completely different that came to tell me about it. So yeah, I think the police really were wonderful, but I do think the system makes it difficult for them to really follow something through right to the end. And obviously that was quite a long process because it was such a long time between the offence and when he was caught. In the very early days after the assault, when we were still trying to see if he could be caught, I was asked by the police to do a identikit picture, which I didn't really understand anything about technology. I thought that they actually had an artist who would draw a picture, and I couldn't really see the value because I didn't have a face to put to it. But anyway, I just wanted to do what I could to help get him apprehended. But what actually happened was they used computer-generated graphics to create the picture. So it's actually just a policeman sitting down in front of a computer and putting images together. And because there was no, because I didn't have a face that I could just look through a book and pick, they kind of left me in a room with about, I don't know, it seemed like about 14 lever arch files just full of images of male offenders. And it was really an awful experience looking at all of those images, one after the other, after the other, after the other. And some of the images of the men were, I mean, I think the sheer number was really overwhelming. Instead of just having one perpetrator to worry about, I felt like I had hundreds of them. And many of them looked terrible. They looked beyond despairing. They looked, you know, frightening and manic and everything else in between. And I remember that night just having nightmares about all I could see was the faces. And, you know, I felt afterwards, you know, and I did give the feedback to the police, I think I needed to have a little bit more support and a little bit more information about what that process would entail, because it definitely re-traumatised, because it was nearly a week after the assault that I did it, and it was in some ways, I think, it's not just about the assault on your physical person, and that's a really awful thing to undergo, but it's the loss of belief in the goodness of human nature that for me was really difficult, and that really exacerbated that loss of belief in human nature. Was very difficult. The legal process began after he was apprehended, so that was a very long time. As mentioned, it was 14 months after the assault he was finally apprehended, and to everybody's surprise, given the overwhelming nature of the evidence, he didn't plead guilty. He pleaded not guilty. And because he pleaded not guilty, it meant that the whole legal machine was starting up. So that felt a little bit like an enormous machine that you have no control over. I mean, I had always been committed to going through with the legal process, but once you're actually confronted with it, it was really a different thing. The victim support services and SARC, whenever you rang on the phone, they were always really nice, and you know, there were times when I used their helpline, especially in the middle of the night when you just needed to talk to somebody qualified. They were really fantastic. But the very first time I rang the Department of Public Prosecutions, I was shocked by how rude the person on the phone was. It was quite overwhelming, and I felt like a number, and I felt like a perpetrator. I felt like a nuisance, and it wasn't a good start. And it made me feel a lot more about the reality of having made the decision to report and what that was going to mean for me. It got better from there, thank heavens. The difficult thing with the whole the DPP process is that there is absolutely no continuity. They have a file manager, and the file manager looks after your case, but they may never appear in court on your behalf, and that was the case for me. The file manager, who was really kind and considerate and gave me a lot of time, never actually appeared in court. So I felt in some ways he knew me the best, and I understood that he wasn't my lawyer, but it's just a unique situation with sexual assault where, you know, you really are on the stand in a way no other witness is, and you feel that there is nobody on your side. So while the perpetrator has their own lawyer who attends every single legal proceeding, you have kind of one overworked lawyer who may have only just been briefed about it fairly recently, who's got to come to grips with it. The way I managed that was with the file manager. We negotiated that before each court event I would speak to whoever it was that was going to be at court and introduce myself, even if it was just on the phone, just to talk through the issues, so that I felt that they would have a bit more of an understanding than perhaps the file would give him. I also had I had really strong personal support. I had a friend who was a lawyer, and he just chose to sit in on all of the different proceedings which I didn't attend, and he gave me feedback about how it went, and he explained it all to me. And I often wondered, what is it like for people without that support? How do you cope? You know, why can't we all have that? I know in New South Wales, I don't know if they're still doing it, but at one point they utilised the pro bono services of, I think it was Clayton Utz, or a very large lawyer. All of the law firms have to do pro bono work, and they actually provided a third lawyer who was for the witness in sexual assault and sexual abuse cases. And I think that that's what you need. I think you need that level of support. How it went for me was at the very, very last moment of the legal proceedings, the perpetrator changed his plea to guilty. So I was very relieved not to have to go through the witness process. I understood that consent was not an issue in my case, but I had by then read Surviving the Legal Justice System, and I knew it was not going to be easy, and I was really quite concerned. And my neighbour, who was my partner by then, was also going to subpoena it as a witness, and it was very difficult for our relationship to have that kind of external pressure. And we were very, very grateful that we didn't actually have to go through with the trial itself. After I had been to the Sexual Assault Resource Centre, I did receive a feedback document requesting feedback. It was part of the information brochure, that package that I had at the time that they sent out. And I actually sent back 3 pages of response, because I felt that it had been both really good and not so good. And so I put all of that down in the document, and I was actually receiving counselling at that time, and as part of the counselling we talked about it as well, and I felt that they handled it quite well, and they listened to what I had to say. And we had a bit of a conversation. At the time, one of my concerns was how awful the shower was at SARC. It was really appalling, the most appalling shower in the world, and I just think it's one of the few times in your life you want a really nice hot shower, and it was awful. Since that time, that building that I attended has actually been knocked down, and a beautiful new complex has been built. But way before that happened, there was a initiative by SARC to try and engage with women who'd been through the service to see if they were interested in giving some feedback, as you know, almost like a focus group. And so I was asked if I would be interested, you know, and I'm assuming that was on the basis of the feedback I provided. And so I became involved through a small focus group. It was, I thought, a really good process. I do find that most people do not want to talk about this sort of issues, and I completely understand and respect that. But there are some of us that seek to make meaning by what's happened to us through trying to create things, systemic change, for trying to make things better for others that come behind you. And that is how we make meaning of it, and it's a very strong and enduring motivation. For some people, everybody's different, everybody has their own way, but that was what it was for me. So that forum was the beginning of me working with a group of women, and we eventually became an incorporated organisation, and we got some funding from the Office of Women's Interests, and we did some work together. So it was like all of those things, it was very difficult in that most of it was done for love, and we as volunteers, we didn't always feel that we wanted to be engaged in that kind of work, so it was a little bit hit and miss, but it was also a really great opportunity for us to create something good. And we had one really fantastic, for us, a really fantastic day where we had a mixture of information about restorative justice and compensation, how to obtain it, but also about healing modalities. We had a couple of healers come along, so we sort of had half, you know, systemic issues and half healing issues, and it was just there was just 20 of us women in the room. Most of us had never met before, and it was a really, really amazing experience. Like many of those sorts of things, it was a bit difficult to sustain, and it led to me being involved in doing victim representation on a number of committees, and I still sit on one of those committees. That is something, as I say, because my enduring need to feel that I've made something good happen out of an awful situation, I still sit on it, but it does have difficulties, you know. Being the only victim in a room of professionals can be really difficult, and there can be times when you do feel stigmatised by professionals as if you're something other. And I understand often that people don't want to acknowledge that this can happen to anybody. So it can be a difficult process, but also it can be incredibly rewarding when you know that if your voice was not there in the room, then the victim's voice would not be heard at all. I do think that victims and consumers of services have a really important place in systems delivery, and I think we need to be supported and encouraged in that process, and it can really have a lot of benefits for you as a person. So I think my enduring passions are to create better services for women who've been sexually assaulted, and, you know, as it guess as a flow-on effect for more women to feel that they can be supported through the criminal justice process if that's an option for them, and if it's not an option for them, that they understand how they can access healing services to become once again a whole person, perhaps not the same, but not a lesser person than before the assault. The other thing I have an enduring passion for is restorative justice and trying to keep communities safe, but that's another whole area. The compensation process, I found the criminal justice compensation department was incredibly supportive. They will actually look at compensation even if there has never been, if you've actually you have to have reported the offence, but even if there has perhaps never been anybody found, or if there has been a acquittal, they may still consider in special circumstances that they may still be able to offer something, and they really support you in the process of putting it together, as does Victim Support Services, and SARC were also really helpful. And I think it's a very important process. I do think money is symbolic, and it is important that you do seek some redress, and money is a really practical way. It's another sign that the community says what happened to you was not okay. So I think, you know, the process of obtaining criminal justice compensation was generally speaking pretty positive. I do have some concerns about the fact that the compensation awarded may be sought from the perpetrator. I think that the fact that the money may be sought from the perpetrator could reduce the safety of the victim and could reduce the willingness of the victim to put in a claim. But having said all that, I still think it's important that people use these channels. This is what they're there for. With the criminal injuries compensation process, it is more lenient in that they actually just have to look on the balance of probabilities whether they feel that a crime occurred and that you were the victim of it in order to award compensation. So it's a lesser burden of proof than the criminal justice system, where it has to be beyond all reasonable doubt. And I did find that they really made the process as easy as they could. They have an information session that they run, I think, most months, or certainly they did at the time that I went through the process. And Victim Support Services and SARC were really helpful in, you know, getting the report together, getting all the evidence together to lodge it. So that is one area. The area of restorative justice, I think, is very... I think we could do a lot more in restorative justice than we do. However, there is a department that will, they're called the Victim Mediation Unit, and what they will do is they will facilitate a meeting between yourself and the perpetrator, so that you can have an opportunity to let them hear the impact of the crime on you, and they may have an opportunity to apologise and to face up to the reality of what they've done, and in some way perhaps even try and make good from what they have done. I do feel that the legal process does not really require people to face up to the reality of what they've done and how they've affected another person, and I do feel that having to face up to it is a bit of a deterrent. The Victim Offender Mediation Unit were incredibly supportive. They had me on file for it was actually 6 years before I did the interview. There was a number of reasons why I didn't want to do it earlier, but they were always available to talk to me. They always had my file there. They had a lot of continuity. They'd only changed in that 6 years. They'd only changed from one person to another. I had a female mediator, and I just felt the need for a male presence, and I didn't really, there wasn't really anybody who wanted to come with me that I felt appropriate, because it was such a personal thing. My partner didn't want to come, and I didn't really want anyone else, any other male to come, except somebody in a professional capacity. So they actually gave me 2 mediators, the one who was assigned to my case and a male mediator, and the conference itself was really beneficial for me. I know it may sound strange, but I do have a lot of concerns about, I guess, some of the basic causes behind crime, and in this case the perpetrator was somebody who had not had anywhere near the sort of supports that he needed throughout his life, and although he had to take responsibility for making a terrible choice, he was not a dreadful person. And I think that we need to understand that we can't always just hand everything over to government agencies. We too, as individuals, are part of the process of making society safer. So that was one process that I undertook. The other that I got involved with was the Sycamore Tree Project. So that is that's a church-based program, but I'm not a church-based person, but was able to contribute. And basically they get together a group of prisoners, they call them inmates, I think, or residents, they call them residents, and a much smaller group of victims of crime, and they have to have no connection with each other. And then they facilitate a 6-week group, and in that 6-week group the victims and the residents tell their stories in different ways. And again, it's about understanding the impact of your actions, because it will always happen that the story that the victim tells will resonate to the resident in a way perhaps he's never thought of before, and bring home to him the impact of what he's done perhaps many times over his life. So it is again a process of really trying to basically stop recidivism, stop reoffending, and make the community safer. Again, for me, that was another way of making meaning of what had happened to me, and it is something I think has been beneficial for me as a victim, but I think has also been beneficial to the people that I spoke to. I know that one of the groups that I told my story to, there were 5 sex offenders there, and I did feel that I was reaching more than I reached with the one-on-one interview with the person who had assaulted me.